Okay, we have Suns versus Clippers as the conference finals matchup, and the game will probably be happening within a few hours of when this video is posted, so let's not bother wasting any time with any exposition or whatever the fuck, and let's just get right into this series. So, Suns versus Clippers, who will win? Let's talk about it. Before I continue on with this video, about half of the people that watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you fall in that 50%, then please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 200k on this channel by the end of the year. Also, drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Also, real quick, my reaction to game 1 of this series will be out a few hours after this video, after I watch the game, obviously. So go subscribe to my second channel where I've been doing post-game reactions for nearly every playoff game. So the first thing you have to mention when talking about this series, a very important thing, and that is that injury as well as COVID protocol have affected what the actual players are going to be. Kawhi Leonard has some sort of, I believe it's an ACL injury, but it's not a serious one, but it's enough of a thing that they have to be very cautious with him. And as a result, he's at the very least not going to play the first 2 games because he did not travel with the team to Phoenix. And Chris Paul has COVID, even though I believe he at least allegedly is vaccinated. So the actual timeline on recovery from that, when you're vaccinated, I don't know the science of that. I probably could have researched it, but I didn't. But I know at the very least he's not going to play game 1 because he was not cleared for that. And I would guess that he probably misses a few games on top of that. So, for actually predicting the series with that happening, it's rather difficult because, of course, you can't really know what's going to happen until it happens. So I'm just going to say, for the sake of giving me the grounds for an actual prediction, I'm just going to say that both Kawhi and Chris Paul missed the first 4 games of this series, whether it is a 5-game series to a 7-game series, because I definitely don't think it's going to be a sweep. It will not be any of Chris Paul or Kawhi for those first 4 games. I think that's a relatively fair prediction. And I'm also going to say that Kawhi is probably about 75 to 80% of what we typically expect of Kawhi in those 1 to 3 games, however many games this series does go. So that's the ground that I'm basing this on. It's a very rough prediction. I just realized this cup is still here. God damn it. So just keep that in mind with my prediction. That's the context that has affected this prediction in many ways, but it can also just change. There are ways this could flip in a different direction, and then suddenly my prediction is completely different. If you could tell me the future right now in terms of what injury and COVID protocol and all that happens, I would be able to make a more accurate prediction, but unfortunately I don't have a time machine yet. So right out of the gates, matchup wise, you're going to have to load up on Paul George because the Clippers are obviously going to be leaning on him rather heavily. And then of course you give him the Mikal Bridges matchup, and I think you're pretty happy with that matchup. Bring doubles where you can, but also don't leave their shooters open, especially when they're running that small ball lineup, and I think you should be relatively okay with that. Now the question is, when Kawhi Leonard comes back, do you give Mikal that matchup, or do you keep him on PG? Because if my prediction of him being like 75-80% when he's back is actually accurate, then maybe you'd rather just have Jay Crowder on Kawhi, and the guy who's likely going to be the first option, or at the very least the most effective one, in Paul George, that's who you actually put Bridges on. Even though Kawhi is a better player normally, he might not be for the remainder of that series. So that would be an interesting thing. I guess it's a road that you cross when you get to it, or a bridge that you cross when you get to it. But yeah. And I mentioned it briefly at the start here, but one question for this series would definitely be DeAndre Ayton versus the Clippers small ball lineup. Of course, we saw the Clippers completely play Rudy Gobert off of the floor in game, or not, I guess they didn't play him off of the floor. They played him to an extent that he should have been off of the floor, but he wasn't. So we saw the Clippers destroy Rudy Gobert with their small ball lineup, even without Kawhi Leonard in the final 2 games of that series. So is that going to happen to DeAndre Ayton? Well, I will say, first of all, Ayton is definitely more mobile than Rudy Gobert, and I think more willing to step out of the paint just in general. And even though he might get burned a few times, and definitely enough to where maybe we don't see him in the game late in bigger moments, he's also somebody that is going to be more capable of physically taking advantage of not big players in the paint. Rudy Gobert is not going to post up on Marcus Morris, but DeAndre Ayton might. He probably very likely will, especially if Phoenix is looking for him, which I would hope that they would do. So there's a way that they can counteract the negative that he brings with some actual positive. Meanwhile, Rudy Gobert in that series, when he's getting burned on defense, he's not bringing you much offensively. So at that point, what was he really providing for you? And maybe this is my way of realizing that DeAndre Ayton is better than Rudy Gobert, but that's a different conversation for another day. The point is, Ayton is much more likely to punish the Clippers small ball than any other team that they have faced to this point, so that is worth considering. The Mavericks couldn't punish it because Porzingis is a 7'3" shooting guard, and the Jazz couldn't punish it because Rudy Gobert is French Roy Hibbert. Paul George better be guarding Devin Booker. Don't pull any bullshit. Put him on Devin Booker. Not like what you do with Luka. He needs to be guarding Devin Booker, no question. Now, you might make the energy argument. I don't want to hear it for a guy with PG's defensive pedigree. If you're that good defensively, prove it to me and actually defend the best player on the team. That was my biggest gripe with how they defended Luka in the first round, was that these guys who have a perimeter defensive reputation weren't even taking that matchup. When Chris Paul does come back, presuming that he does, I would like a wing on him, like in an ideal world, but at the same time, I would not ask a lot out of Kawhi Leonard defensively with him coming back from injury. It's a different circumstance because Paul George is completely healthy, but Kawhi, I would try to do as little as possible to make him have too much of a workload. So if you can take away from that by just having Reggie Jackson guard Chris Paul, that would be fine. On top of that, I don't think Chris Paul is going to be as effective in this series as he was in round 2, because with the Clippers small ball, they're not going to be punished with the drop big like Nikola Jokic in the Denver Nuggets series. Marcus Morris will definitely step up and contest Chris Paul's mid-range shots, so it's probably going to be more Chris Paul as a passer in this series. Really, the Clippers defense is going to be more focused on stopping Ayton on the roll, and maybe you'll give up a couple of Chris Paul middies as a result of that, but ultimately, I don't think Chris Paul is going to average like 25 like he did in the Nuggets series. I think it was somewhere in that ballpark. Nor is he going to hit 15 mid-range shots in a row, which is not a hyperbole, it feels like. At least it didn't seem like at the time. For the Clippers, offensively, without Kawhi Leonard, I mean, I could suggest some stuff to do off ball or whatever, like different types of sets, but ultimately, the Clippers are not really one to do that, so you're really just going to be relying pretty heavily on Paul George having a really good series. You're going to have to be getting him doing some off-ball stuff, but for the most part, it's going to be Paul George on the ball. And then, of course, you're going to want Marcus Morris as well as Reggie Jackson, who's been amazing in the playoffs, to step up offensively and scoring off of the dribble wise as well. Have your guys hit their spot up shots, things like that. We know what the deal is with the Clippers at this point. I don't think you're going to expect another crazy, like 39-point Terrence Mann game, so don't lean on that. But speaking of leaning on things, that's where my hesitance in the Clippers, especially without Kawhi, really starts to stick out. Because I don't want to bet on the team that has Paul George as the primary guy and then Marcus Morris and Reggie Jackson as the second and third guy for at least a large percentage of a series. Those are not three names that I feel comfortable leaning on heavily in a Western Conference Finals matchup, and that doesn't really take anything away from those players. That's just not really who they are. And I already don't feel very comfortable betting on the Clippers based on their past, specifically because they tend to be very wishy-washy, and that is with Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi was always the reliable, consistent, yeah, Kawhi is probably going to have a good game. Other than Game 7 of the second round in 2020, I can't really think of an instance where Kawhi just straight up did not show up for the Clippers. He's at the very least the guy that you can bet on to be consistent for this team, and he's not going to be there for at least a good chunk of the series. So at that point, I'm not confident betting on the Clippers in pretty much any context, let alone against a team in the Phoenix Suns, even without Chris Paul, that is very consistent, very reliable. You know what to expect of the players on this team. You know what to expect of how they play together, what kind of plays they're going to run, the efficiency they're going to have, their defense. Everything is not like you can just flip the script like game to game, like it is with the Clippers. The Clippers were already like that with Kawhi, so it's only elevated further without him. So I'm going to bet on the Phoenix Suns in this series simply because I believe you can rely upon this team even without Chris Paul, because as we saw in the first, 10 playoff games for them, with or without Chris Paul, they looked like a really, really good, consistent, well-coached, well-executed team. A team being the key word there. Now, the Clippers and camaraderie and on-the-court chemistry-wise have looked a lot better as of late in the playoffs than they did at the very start versus the Dallas Mavericks. However, it's still not in the same realm as what the Phoenix Suns are, and even though a healthy Clippers team has more talent, the Phoenix Suns are definitely a better team, a better cohesive unit. So I might even lean Suns at least a little bit with a healthy Kawhi. I'd probably still go Clippers, but not exactly would be shocked if the Suns won that series, to say the least. But without him for a large percentage of the series, I just have to go with the Phoenix Suns as a result of that, even with no Chris Paul, because I definitely think the Suns without Chris Paul are better than the Clippers without Kawhi. So for that reason, I'm going to go with the Suns and let's say 6. I definitely think the Clippers, even with a hobbled Kawhi for a small last 2 games or so, would definitely put up a fight and win a game or 2 even without Kawhi. However, just not going to bet on that for a series win. I do have to say, though, once again, just from the preface of the intro, there is some stuff that can throw a wrench in this. Maybe Kawhi is back game 3 and he's amazing immediately and he's healthy throughout the whole series. Maybe Chris Paul's back game 2 and I don't know shit about how COVID after having the vaccine works, which that's not a maybe. I definitely don't know. It's just a fucking prediction. So that can change the results of what that series actually is, but assuming my ballpark figure of both of them don't play the first 4 games or so, and Kawhi is not very great or not as good as normal, assuming that holds, then I would go Suns in 6, but ultimately we're just going to have to wait and see in this instance. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.